The sacrifice. The air hung thick inside Vorlo Station's central plaza, a suffocating blend of recycled atmosphere, spice-laden smoke from countless food vendors, and the acrid bite of Starship discharge. Augie stood against the bulkhead with a cup of bitter, cheap stimulant in his hand. His break was already half finished. The heavy work jacket, marking him as drive core maintenance, offered little protection against the artificial chill that permeated everything. He watched the endless stream of alien life pass before him. Insectoid creatures with 6 articulated legs moved with synchronized precision. Gas ray visitors floated in their encounter suits, willowy and ethereal. And then there were the Callan, bipedal feline beings whose pointed ears and flowing tails made them unmistakable even in this chaotic crowd. That's when his attention snagged on something unusual. A small Kalan child had wandered away from her protective detail, a group of armored soldiers who were far too focused on confronting some aggressive Rigelian traders. The girl couldn't have been more than 5 years old in human terms. Her skin glowed with a pale, luminous lilac hue. She stood transfixed before a holographic advertisement, displaying swirling, glittering confections, completely unaware of the danger closing in. The plaza erupted into chaos. 2 figures in black tactical suits raised weapons toward the sky. These weren't station security. These were operatives with lethal intent. Their target was unmistakable: the Kalan delegation. The first pulse of blue-white energy discharged from their rifles, obliterating a cargo drone and sending the crowd into screaming panic. People scattered in all directions, desperate to escape the crossfire. Augie saw it all in slow motion, the child's eyes widening in pure terror, the assassins pivoting, recalibrating their aim directly at the small, noble-born girl frozen in confusion. He didn't think. His body simply responded. Augie dove forward, his larger frame connecting with the child and carrying her down to the hard surface. He wrapped himself around her protectively, tucking her head against his chest as they crashed to the ground. His body became a living shield, human muscle and bone positioned between the child and certain death. The world ignited. The first blast struck his back with the force of a collapsing star. The energy impact drove the air from his lungs and sent shockwaves through every nerve ending. The second bolt followed moments later, lower, searing into his jacket. The cheap, ablative fibers sparked and hissed, designed for routine heat dispersal, not thermic pulse weapons. The material failed, and catastrophic heat seared down to his skin, blistering and burning. He heard the child scream, a high, thin wail of terror muffled against his shirt. The third bolt, the fourth. Lines of pure fire walked up his spine like a serpent of agony. His nervous system became a screaming alarm. The fifth blast boiled the moisture from his skin. The sixth drove deep, as if cooking him from the inside out. His muscles locked reflexively, but he held firm, his arms an unbreakable vice around the small body beneath him. The seventh, the eighth. The final bolt struck the base of his skull with apocalyptic force. His vision exploded into white static, then faded to absolute black. His last conscious sensation was the acrid smell of his own charred flesh. And then, nothing. The awakening. When Augie regained consciousness, his entire body felt like a map of radiating pain. He tried to lift his hand and found it sluggish, unresponsive. A crisp, cool synthetic sheet lay across his chest. He was in a medical facility. The room existed in near-total darkness. The walls were sleek black, and the only illumination came from silent alien diagnostic monitors casting faint, ghostly light. When he attempted to turn his head, white-hot pains spiked through his temples. He discovered his skull was wrapped in synthetic bandaging, the texture rough and unfamiliar against his skin. Something shifted on the mattress beside him. Through his blurred vision, he made out a figure. The small Kalan child sat at the foot of his bed, legs folded, watching him with enormous, solid violet eyes that never blinked. Her pale purple skin seemed to emit its own faint luminescence in the darkness. Her long obsidian hair was immaculate, and her tufted purple tail was wrapped neatly around her small waist. Her expression was one of unsettling, tranquil observation. A dry rasp escaped Augie's throat when he tried to speak. The child simply tilted her head, Then, without warning, something detached itself from the deeper shadows. Another figure stepped forward, and then another. Two more emerged from the darkness. These beings were massive, each standing at least 6.5 feet tall, encased entirely in sleek, advanced black armor that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Opaque T-shaped visors glowed with soft, menacing blue illumination. A matching circular energy core pulsed with the same eerie radiance in the center of each chest plate. They were the child's guards. They stood in the doorway like judges in some ancient tribunal, silent, faceless, radiating an unspoken threat so powerful the air itself seemed to thicken. The lead warrior, fractionally taller than the others, her entire posture conveying absolute authority, took one deliberate step into the chamber. Her boots struck the floor with a distinct thud. "You are awake," a filtered voice stated, feminine but processed through her helmet speakers into a flat, emotionless monotone. "This is the private medical bay of the Kalen Noble delegation, House of Veer. The child Lady Aaron remains unharmed. You have succeeded in your objective." Augie's throat was raw, his voice barely functional. I don't... I didn't have a choice." The warrior stepped closer, and he could feel the subtle vibration emanating from her armor's power core, a low-frequency hum that made his skin prickle. "Your medical readings constitute an impossibility," she continued with clinical precision. "Your industrial-grade vest is not armor, yet somehow the combination of fabric and soft tissue dispersed energetic output that should have vaporized your torso completely. The vest is slag. Your body is charred. Your internal organs show severe trauma. By all biological probability, you should not exist, and yet here you are." "I don't have anything to say about that," Augie managed. "No," the warrior agreed. "You would not." She extended one armored hand to her chest, placing a gauntleted fist over the glowing core in a formal gesture. "I am High Praetorian Lanera, protector of Lady Aaron. By the ancient and absolute law of my people, your selfless action has invoked the Vashnalier, the binding of life debt. I have failed in my primary duty to protect my charge. That failure should have cost me my life. Instead, you claimed it with your sacrifice." Augie's eyes widened. "I don't want—" "Your desires are irrelevant," Lanera interrupted. "The debt is absolute. By saving her life at the cost of your own, I am now bound to you. I, Lanera of House Valir, am permanently bound by our most sacred law. My life, my honor, and my service are now your property for as long as you draw breath." The disdain in her synthesized voice was almost tactile. She despised this. She despised him. She despised the entire situation. A medical droid, a hovering silver disc, entered the room. "Patient vitals are stabilizing. Nutrient infusion required." "Dismissed," Lanera commanded sharply. The droid froze and immediately retreated. She turned back to Augie. "The debt is absolute and binding. My first duty is your preservation." She activated a control on her gauntlet, and a medical supply tray slid from a recessed wall panel. "The droids are calibrated for Kalen physiology. They will be inadequate for your species. The other guards are dismissed. I will handle your care directly." She made a sharp gesture, and the three armored figures pivoted in unison, exiting silently through the sliding door. He was alone with her and the child. Lanera stood over his bed, a towering figure of advanced battle technology and coiled power. "Your bandages require replacement," she announced. Her voice held no warmth, no accommodation, pure efficiency. She gripped the edge of the sheet and pulled it down, exposing his bare chest to her inspection. Augie felt a flush of vulnerability wash over him. Completely exposed before this armored warrior, her glowing visor swept across his torso in what was clearly a clinical assessment. She began working with mechanical precision. Her gauntleted fingers were not gentle. They were exact and firm, bordering on rough. The metal was unforgiving and cold against his damaged skin. As she peeled away old bandages from his shoulder where a blast had grazed him, he felt the constant low vibration of her power core traveling through her hands, sending unwelcome shivers through his nervous system. Every time her armored chest plate brushed against his arm, The sensation was stark and disorienting, cold, metallic friction that reminded him constantly of the immense power contained just inches from his vulnerable flesh. She was caring for him, yet it felt like an invasion. The bond unveiled. 2 station days passed. Augie remained confined to that medical chamber, a prisoner of his own recovery. The Callan medical technology was astonishing. The charred craters on his back sealed over with rapidly regenerating tissue. Though the deep nerve pain persisted like an unwelcome ghost, he attempted to refuse the debt twice. "This isn't necessary," he said, pushing himself up on his elbows when Lanera entered with another nutrient solution. "I don't need a servant. Just let me return to my work." She placed the tray down with a sharp metallic clack. "Your comprehension is fundamentally lacking, human. The Vashnalier is not employment." The bond unveiled. 2 station days passed. Augie remained confined to that medical chamber, a prisoner of his own recovery. The Kalen medical technology was astonishing. The charred craters on his back sealed over with rapidly regenerating tissue. Though the deep nerve pain persisted like an unwelcome ghost, he attempted to refuse the debt twice. "This isn't necessary," he said, pushing himself up on his elbows when Lanera entered with another nutrient solution. "I don't need a servant. Just let me return to my work." She placed the tray down with a sharp metallic clack. "Your comprehension is fundamentally lacking, human. The Vashnalier is not employment. It is sacred law, a binding that cannot be refused, only fulfilled. You are my charge now. Your life is my entire purpose. Until you cease to exist, I am your shadow." Her filtered voice permitted no argument. They were both trapped, him by circumstance, her by the immutable law of her people. He was never alone. One of her 3-person team stood sentinel inside his door at all times, helmeted and silent. But Lanera herself was the most unsettling constant. When she wasn't actively tending to his medical requirements, she stood motionless in the corner of the room. She never slept. She never sat. She simply existed, her glowing blue visor fixed unblinkingly upon him for hours without end. He found himself watching her in return. He observed the perfect, economical stillness of a hunting predator. He noted how the ambient light played across the overlapping, articulated plates of her armor, how the metal seemed to absorb illumination rather than reflect it. He memorized the faint, sterile scent that clung to her, ionized air and polished metal, and the barely perceptible hum of her armor's power core. Lady Erin visited frequently. She would slip into the chamber, climb onto the foot of his bed, and simply observe him with those enormous violet eyes. She never spoke. Not to him, not to Lanera. She existed like a silent, lilac-skinned figure from a dream. The moment of true transformation arrived on the 3rd day. His leg muscles were beginning to regenerate, but he remained weak and unsteady. When biological necessity dictated a visit to the sanitation unit, he attempted to stand independently. His legs buckled immediately. Before he could collapse, Lanera materialized beside him, a blur of movement so swift his mind barely registered her crossing the distance. One armored arm encircled his waist, supporting him as if he weighed nothing. "I require assistance," he managed, humiliation burning through him. "I am aware," her filtered voice replied. She carried him into the sanitation chamber, a starkly lit white room that only made her dark armor appear more menacing. There was no privacy. She was his caretaker and his servant, and that apparently included this intimate necessity. He stood swaying, leaning heavily against her. Her armor was cold through his thin medical tunic. "I can manage from here," he said, his jaw tight. "Negative," she replied. "Your motor control remains compromised. A fall would jeopardize your recovery and leave my debt unfulfilled." She was immovable. He was trapped. Cursing silently, he endured what he considered the deepest humiliation of his existence. With her standing barely a foot away, her glowing blue visor fixed upon him, he was forced to perform the most private human function imaginable. His bare skin prickled beneath her unseen gaze. It was the most profound demonstration of power he had ever experienced. The absolute vulnerability of his soft flesh contrasted against her armored invulnerability. Later that cycle, pain returned with ferocity. It wasn't the dull ache of healing muscle. It was a sharp, sporadic sensation like live current being driven through his spine. The Kalin medical systems were doing their best, but they were essentially improvising, calibrated for a completely different physiology. Augie lay on his side, eyes squeezed shut, knuckles white against the bedrail. He had always prided himself on pain tolerance. Doc work demanded it. But this was different. This was his nervous system registering a systemic protest from every damaged fiber. He made no sound. He simply focused on breathing, riding out each invisible spike. Then the small, familiar weight settled onto the mattress beside him. He opened his eyes. Lady Erin had positioned herself closer this time, sitting by his hip. She examined his face with her head tilted and very slowly extended one of her small, four-fingered, purple hands to rest gently on his. Her skin was cool, and the gesture was so unexpected, so purely compassionate, that it nearly shattered his composure. Lanera stood by the medical console, observing everything. She saw the minute tremor in his hand. She witnessed the sweat beading on his bandaged temple. She saw the child reach for him, and something inside her fractured. She strode to the console, her armored footsteps heavy with purpose. "Medical diagnostic," she commanded. The system chimed in response. "Patient neural feedback presents erratic patterns, recalibrating analgesic protocols," the mechanical voice reported. "Insufficient," Lanera stated flatly. She slammed her gauntleted fist onto the console. "Recalibrate for variant nervous system architecture. Boost the inhibitor levels, now. Parameters exceed safe limits. Analgesic boost cannot be administered," the system replied. "Override," Lanera roared, and the voice that emerged was not the cold, flat monotone of her helmet speakers. It was her true voice. It was a low, melodic contralto, laced with raw fury and a distinctly feline snarl. It was a voice of absolute command that vibrated the very air itself. It was the most human, most alive sound he had heard from her, and it was terrifying. The door hissed open. A Kalin male in civilian medical robes entered rapidly. Augie recognized him as the chief physician for House Valir, a noble in his own right. His purple ears were pinned back in agitation. "Praetorian, you will not interface with my equipment," the physician stated sharply. "That console requires microneural adjustments, not your crude commands." "My equipment is failing him," Lanera snarled, turning her full attention to the doctor. Her real voice was a shock to the system. "It is calibrated," the doctor shot back. "The human's biology is primitive and unpredictable. His pain is not your concern. Your only duty is the Vashnalier. Tend to his needs and step aside from my medical systems." "You lecture me on the debt?" Lanera's voice dropped to a lethal hiss. She took one deliberate step forward, and the physician visibly flinched. "I am bound to him. His suffering is my direct concern because his life is my burden." "A burden you resent," the doctor countered, his professional pride wounded. "Your anger isn't directed at my console, Praetorian. It's directed at the bond itself. You resent being bound to a primitive." "I am bound," Lanera gritted out, her fists clenching at her sides. "And you don't even understand half of it." The doctor's voice turned cruelly sharp. "The great Praetorian, so full of honor, bound by the oldest law. You think it's servitude. You resent him." He laughed, an ugly cutting sound, twisting the knife with deliberate precision. "But you're wrong about what the Vashnalier actually is. It hasn't been a servant's debt for 1,000 years. It's an imprint bond, a biological imperative. Our ancestors triggered it only in those who proved their worth through the ultimate act of protection. It's a warrior's instinct to claim and protect a mate." The room fell into absolute silence. The physician's words hung suspended in the air like shattered glass. Augie's heart hammered against his ribs. He stared at Lanera's glowing blue visor. A mate. The revelation hung between them like a physical presence. The doctor, realizing what he had just revealed and to whom, took a hasty step backward. "Praetorian, Lanera turned her body with slow, deliberate, chilling precision. She didn't speak. She simply raised one armored hand and pointed directly at the door. The doctor fled immediately. The door slid shut with finality. Augie was alone with her once more, and the silence was a screaming void. The entire dynamic of their relationship, master and servant, specimen, and researcher, had not merely cracked. It had been obliterated. The truth emerges. "A mate," Augie said quietly, his voice raw with emotion and sudden understanding. "Is that what this is?" Lanera's head snapped toward him. Her glowing blue visor seemed to burn in the dim light. She said nothing. "Is that true?" he pressed, pushing himself up on his elbows despite the pain screaming through his back. Because that doctor sounded like someone who knew exactly what he was talking about. Lanera's fist clenched, her entire body coiled like a spring wound to its breaking point. She was a warrior, a being defined by control and discipline. Yet the physician had stripped her bare in front of a primitive alien she was now biologically bonded to. She was trapped by honor, by duty, and now he knew it, trapped by a biological imperative she clearly despised. She turned to face him fully. The glowing blue core on her chest pulsed in a steady rhythm. Thump, 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 like a mechanical heart. "Your sacrifice in the plaza," she said, her voice trembling slightly beneath the filter. "It was absolute, illogical. You are not Kalen. The child was not your blood. You should have fled." "I couldn't," Augie said simply. "I just acted." "And that," she hissed, "is the key. The Vashnalier doesn't respond to logic. It responds to proof. You proved yourself and bound me. You proved that you would die for someone not your own.